She announced her boss's baby when I came home early. 3 weeks later, love revealed the truth. The overheard confession. The key turned smoothly in the lock, a sound Rafiq Hassan had made thousands of times in the 3 years since he'd carried Samir across this threshold as his bride. Tonight, that familiar click felt different somehow, though he couldn't have said why. The Mumbai conference had ended a day early, and he decided to surprise his wife with an impromptu return. Perhaps take her out to their favorite rooftop restaurant where the city lights reflected in her dark eyes like stars. He set down his briefcase quietly, already imagining the delight on Samira's face when she saw him. But as he stepped into the foyer, her voice drifted from the living room, tight with emotion. He paused, not wanting to interrupt what sounded like a serious conversation. I know, Samira was saying, her voice thick with unshed tears. But what choice did I have, Aisha? He's dying, and there's no one else. Rafiq's hand froze on his briefcase handle. Who was dying? Yes, I'm carrying the baby, Samira continued, and Rafiq felt his heart stutter. Tariq Sahib's baby. The surrogacy fell through, and he begged me. His mother is too old, and he has no siblings. I couldn't just let an innocent child be abandoned to the system. The words hit Rafiq like physical blows. Tariq Sahib, her boss at the architecture firm. The man she'd worked late with countless times, the man whose dedication she'd praised over dinner just last week. The baby. Tariq's baby. Rafiq will understand when I tell him, Samira said, but her voice cracked with doubt. He has to understand. I just need to find the right time, the right words. But right now, with all the legal complications, I can't explain everything. It sounds so impossible, Aisha. How do I tell my husband I'm pregnant with another man's child? Rafiq didn't hear his sister-in-law's response. The blood rushing in his ears drowned out everything else. His vision blurred at the edges as memories assaulted him. Samira laughing at his terrible jokes during their first coffee date, the way she'd looked at him under the wedding canopy, her hand in his as they'd whispered about the children they'd have someday. Their children. His feet carried him backward, silent on the marble floor. He picked up his briefcase, opened the door he'd just closed, and stepped back into the hallway. The door clicked shut behind him with a finality that seemed to seal away everything he believed about his life. In the elevator, Rafiq stared at his reflection in the polished steel doors. The man looking back at him seemed like a stranger, eyes hollow, face pale, hands trembling as they gripped the briefcase handle. His phone buzzed with a message from Samir, missing you, come home soon. Made your favorite biryani. He couldn't breathe. The elevator walls seemed to close in around him as he descended away from the apartment, away from his wife, away from the life he thought he knew. 3 weeks of distance. Rafiq returned home the next morning, his eyes red-rimmed from a sleepless night in a hotel room where he'd stared at the ceiling until dawn. He walked through the door to find Samira in the kitchen, her face lighting up with relief before concern clouded her features. Rafiq, I thought you weren't coming back until tomorrow. Are you all right? You look exhausted. He couldn't meet her eyes. Those warm brown eyes that had once been his safe harbor now felt like windows into a betrayal he couldn't comprehend. Meetings ended early. I'm fine, just tired. Going to shower. The words came out flat, mechanical. He brushed past her, avoiding the touch of her hand reaching for his arm. In the bathroom, he braced his hands against the sink and finally let himself break, silent tears mixing with the water he splashed on his face. The days that followed became a choreographed dance of avoidance. Rafiq threw himself into his architectural projects with an intensity that worried his colleagues. He volunteered for every late meeting, every site inspection that would keep him away from home. When he did return, he'd find Samira already in bed, or he'd claim exhaustion and retreat to the guest room, muttering something about not wanting to disturb her with his early morning calls. Samira felt the distance like a physical wound. She'd wake to find his side of the bed cold and empty, or catch him staring at her with an expression she couldn't decipher, something between longing and anguish. When she tried to talk to him over breakfast, he'd hide behind his tablet. When she suggested they visit his parents in Lucknow for the weekend, he claimed impossible deadlines. Rafiq, please, she said one evening, catching his arm as he headed toward the guest room again. Talk to me. What's wrong? Did something happen at work? With your family. He looked down at her hand on his sleeve, and for a moment she thought he might speak, might let her in. Instead, he gently pulled away. I'm just stressed, Samira. Big project. I need some space to think. Space. The word felt like a chasm opening between them. Alone in bed, Samira pressed her hand to her still flat stomach and thought about the burden she carried. The secret that pressed down on her shoulders, making every breath feel heavy. She'd promised Tariq Sahib she would keep the surrogacy arrangement confidential until all the legal paperwork was finalized. The child growing inside her wasn't hers by blood, a surrogate's embryo, implanted when Tariq's cancer diagnosis had given him months to live and a desperate wish to see his lineage continue. But how could she explain this to Rafiq when the explanation sounded impossible even to her own ears? A dying man's last request. A surrogate who'd fled upon learning of the terminal illness. A promise made in compassion that now felt like a prison of silence. She thought back to better days, memories that now tasted bittersweet. Their first meeting at the architecture symposium where Rafiq's presentation on sustainable housing had captivated her. How he'd nervously asked for her number, then called exactly when he said he would. Their 6th-month anniversary when he created a scavenger hunt across the city, each clue written in terrible poetry that made her laugh until she cried. The night he'd proposed on the rooftop of the building he'd designed, getting down on one knee under a canopy of fairy lights he'd strung himself. I promised to build a life with you, he'd said that night, his voice shaking with emotion, where every room has space for your dreams, every window opens to our future together. Now those windows felt closed, the rooms of their marriage growing dark and cold. On the 20th night of his distance, Samira found herself standing outside the guest room where Rafiq had barricaded himself. She pressed her forehead against the door, tears sliding down her cheeks. Inside, Rafiq sat on the edge of the bed, holding his phone with a photo of their wedding day displayed on the screen. Samira in her red lehenga, looking at him like he held the universe in his hands. He'd believed it then, believed he could give her everything, be everything. Now he felt like a fool. He heard her soft footsteps retreat, and something inside him cracked further. The breaking point. The call came during a Tuesday morning meeting. Rafiq watched Samira's phone light up on the kitchen counter where she'd left it while showering. Tariq Mahmood flashed across the screen, and before he could stop himself, Rafiq answered it. Samira. An elderly woman's voice, trembling with panic. This is Tariq's mother. He's collapsed. We're at Fortis Hospital. He's asking for you. Please come quickly. Rafiq's throat constricted. I'll tell her. He stood frozen, the phone hot against his palm, until Samira emerged from the bedroom, still toweling her hair. She saw his face and stopped dead. That was Tariq's mother, he said, each word feeling like broken glass in his mouth. He's in the hospital. Collapsed. The color drained from Samira's face. She grabbed her phone, her hands shaking as she called back for details. Rafiq watched her transformation, the way professional composure slid over her panic, the efficient way she grabbed her keys and bag, the distracted kiss she pressed to his cheek before rushing out. I have to go, she said. I'll explain everything tonight, I promise. He waited exactly 5 minutes before following her. Fortis Hospital's corridors smelled of antiseptic and anxiety. Rafiq tracked Samira's movements from a distance, his heart hammering against his ribs as she navigated toward the ICU wing. He watched her speak urgently with a nurse, saw her shoulders sag with relief or maybe grief, he couldn't tell anymore. Then she disappeared into a private room. Rafiq stood outside, invisible among the flow of visitors and medical staff, staring at the nameplate, Tariq Mahmood, room 407. Through the narrow window, he could see Samira standing beside a hospital bed. An elderly woman in a cream-colored sari sat in the corner, clutching prayer beads. And in the bed lay a man who looked far older than his years, oxygen tubes running to his nose, his skin carrying the grey pallor of serious illness. Samira held the man's hand, speaking to him with such tenderness that Rafiq felt his knees weaken. He couldn't hear the words, but he saw her wipe tears from her cheeks, saw the dying man try to smile up at her. The elderly woman rose and embraced Samira, and Rafiq saw his wife break down completely, sobbing into the stranger's shoulder while the old woman stroked her hair like a mother comforting a daughter. Something primal and wounded tore loose inside Rafik. 3 weeks of silent agony, 3 weeks of watching his marriage crumble, 3 weeks of imagining scenarios that had tormented him every waking moment, and here was the confirmation. His wife, crying in another family's arms, carrying another man's child. He pushed through the door, no longer capable of restraint. Rafik! Samira gasped, pulling away from the elderly woman, her face streaked with tears. What are you? I need to talk to you. His voice came out raw, barely controlled. Now. The old woman looked between them, confusion and concern creasing her weathered face. The man in the bed tried to sit up, wincing with the effort. Samira, he wheezed, is this? My husband, Samira whispered, and the word hit Rafik like an accusation. Husband. What did that word even mean anymore? Outside, Rafik said through clenched teeth. Please. Samira followed him into the corridor, her eyes wide with something that looked like fear. They stood in a quiet alcove near the emergency stairs, and for a long moment, neither could speak. 3 weeks ago, Rafik finally said, his voice shaking, I came home early. I heard you on the phone with Aisha. You said you were carrying Tariq Sahib's baby. Samira's face went absolutely white. Her lips moved but no sound came out. I've spent 21 days dying inside, Samira. 21 days wondering how the woman I loved more than my own life could do this to us. To me. His voice cracked. I followed you here because I couldn't bear not knowing anymore. And now I see you with him, with his family, and I need you to tell me the truth. All of it. Please. Tears spilled down Samira's cheeks as she reached for him, but he stepped back, and the hurt that flashed across her face almost broke his resolve. The baby, he whispered, the words tasting like poison. Is it his? Yes, Samira said, and the world tilted beneath Rafik's feet. But not the way you think. Rafik, please, let me explain. How else could it be? The words erupted from him, loud enough that a passing nurse glanced their way. He lowered his voice to a harsh whisper. You're pregnant with another man's child. What other way is there to understand that? It's not his biologically, it's not mine either. Samira's words tumbled out desperately. Rafik, he's dying. He has terminal pancreatic cancer. He has maybe weeks left. The baby is his, Rafik finished numbly. You said that. You're carrying his baby. I'm carrying a baby who needs parents, Samira said, gripping his arms now, holding on even as he tried to pull away. A baby conceived through surrogacy, through a donor embryo. Tariq arranged everything before his diagnosis got worse, but the surrogate abandoned the contract when she learned he was terminal. He has no one, Rafik. No wife, no siblings. Just his elderly mother who can't raise a child alone. He begged me to help, to become the legal guardian, to give this child a chance at life instead of being lost in the system. Rafik stared at her, his mind struggling to process words that seemed impossible. You're, what? I agreed to the surrogacy transfer. I'm carrying a child that biologically belongs to neither of us, but legally will be ours if we accept the guardianship. I was going to tell you once the paperwork was finalized, once I could explain everything properly. But when Aisha called that day, I panicked. I didn't know how to explain it quickly, so I said the worst possible version of the truth. The corridor seemed to spin around Rafik. He slumped against the wall, sliding down until he sat on the cold floor, his head in his hands. You're not. He couldn't finish the sentence. Having an affair. God. No, Rafik. Never. I love you. Only you. Always you. Samira sank down beside him, close but not touching, as if afraid he might shatter. I know how this sounds. I know how impossible and insane it all seems. But that man in there is dying, and he just wanted his legacy to continue, wanted a child to carry his name into the future. I couldn't say no when he asked me, not when I have the ability to help. Rafik looked up at her, this woman he'd loved for 3 years, married for 3 years, thought he'd known completely. Why didn't you tell me before you agreed? Because the legal process was so complicated, and I was afraid. She paused, fresh tears streaming down her face. I was afraid you'd ask me not to do it. And I'd already given my word. I'd already committed to helping save a life. In the silence that followed, Rafik heard the hospital sounds, monitors beeping, distant conversations, the squeak of shoes on linoleum. Normal sounds in a moment that felt anything but normal. "Show me," he said finally. "Show me the paperwork. Let me meet him properly. Help me understand, Samira. Because I've been drowning for 3 weeks, and I need to believe in us again." Samira nodded, wiping her eyes. Okay, yes. Let me get the documents from my bag. And Rafik." She looked at him with such vulnerability that his heart clenched. "I'm so sorry you've been hurting. I'm so sorry I handled this so badly. But I need you to know, every moment of these 3 weeks, I've been terrified of losing you. You're my home. You're my everything." He didn't respond, couldn't yet. But he didn't pull away when she briefly touched his hand before rising to get the papers that would either restore his faith or destroy it completely. The truth unveiled. Samira returned with a folder thick with legal documents, her hands trembling as she spread them across the small table in the hospital waiting area. Rafik's eyes scanned the pages, surrogacy agreements, medical records, guardianship paperwork, each one stamped and notarized, each one telling a story he'd never imagined. Tariq Mahmood, age 58, widower, Samira began softly, pointing to a document. His wife Farida died 4 years ago from a stroke. They never had children. When he got the cancer diagnosis 6 months ago, he decided to pursue surrogacy with a donor embryo, neither his genetics nor Farida's, just a chance to raise a child in her memory. Rafik's finger traced the medical timeline. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Prognosis: 4 to 6 months. The dates made his stomach clench. The surrogate was a young woman who needed the money, Samira continued, her voice thick with emotion. But when Tariq's condition deteriorated rapidly and she learned he might not survive to the birth, she panicked. She terminated the contract legally, returned the money, and disappeared. The embryo had already been implanted. "So they transferred it to you?" Rafik asked, his voice hoarse. "Yes. It was the only way to save the pregnancy. Tariq's mother is 74, Rafik. She can't raise a baby alone. He has no other family, no siblings, no cousins close enough to ask. When he begged me, when I saw this elderly woman crying at the thought of her son dying without leaving any legacy, without anyone to carry forward his name." Samira's voice broke. "I thought of your mother, of how she looks at us hoping for grandchildren. I thought of what it would mean to lose everything and everyone." Rafik closed his eyes, trying to absorb it all. "Why didn't you tell me before you agreed?" "I was going to," Samira whispered. "But the hospital needed an immediate answer. The embryo transfer had a very small window. I made the decision in one afternoon, Rafik, and then the guilt and fear just kept building. How do I tell my husband I'm pregnant with a stranger's baby? How do I explain that I made this enormous life decision without consulting him? Every day I planned to tell you, and every day the words seemed more impossible." She pulled out another document, a guardianship agreement with both their names on it, her signature present but his line blank and waiting. "You were always meant to be part of this. I never intended to do this alone. I handled it terribly. And when Aisha called that day and caught me off guard, I panicked and said the simplified version, the version that makes me sound like I'm having an affair." Rafik picked up an ultrasound image, the grainy photo showing a tiny form barely recognizable as human. 12 weeks along. While he'd been torturing himself with visions of betrayal, an innocent life had been growing, caught in the middle of miscommunication and fear. "He's in there dying," Samira said, gesturing toward room 407, "and he just wants to know this baby will be loved. That's all. He's not asking us to pretend the child is biologically ours. He's not asking us to lie. He just wants to know that when he closes his eyes for the last time, there's a future for this little soul." Rafik stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "I need to talk to him. Rafik, he's very weak." I need to talk to him, Rafik repeated, his voice firm but not unkind. If we're going to do this, if we're going to raise his child, then I need to look him in the eye. I need to understand who he is, what he wants for this baby. Can you give me that? Samira nodded, standing and taking his hand. Her fingers were cold in his, and he realized she'd been as terrified as he'd been, just of different things. They walked together to room 407. The elderly woman, Tariq's mother, looked up as they entered, her eyes red-rimmed but hopeful. Tariq himself looked smaller than he had through the window, diminished by illness but with alert, intelligent eyes that fixed on Rafik with something like resignation. You must be Rafik Hassan, Tariq said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for the pain I've caused your marriage. Rafik pulled a chair close to the bed, sitting down so they were eye level. Tell me about your wife. About Farida. Surprise flickered across Tariq's gaunt face. Farida. If I'm going to help raise a child you're bringing into this world in her memory, I should know who she was. Something shifted in Tariq's expression, gratitude mixed with grief. He spoke slowly, pausing often to breathe. She was a teacher. Primary school. She had this way of making every child feel special, like they were the most important person in the room. We tried for years to have children of our own, but it never happened. She always said maybe we were meant to love other people's children instead. He paused, emotion choking him. When she died, I felt like I'd lost my chance to build the family we'd dreamed of. This baby, it's not about genetics or legacy in the traditional sense. It's about giving a child the kind of love Farida would have given. Rafik felt something loosen in his chest. What do you want this child to know about you? That their existence mattered, Tariq said simply. That they were wanted desperately. That two strangers opened their hearts when they didn't have to, and that's the greatest gift anyone can give. He looked at Samir, then back to Rafik. I don't expect you to take my place as a father. I don't expect the child to call me anything at all. I want them to live. To be loved. And Samir promised me that. She made that promise without asking me, Rafik said, and saw his wife flinch beside him. I know, Tariq whispered. And I told her it was wrong, that she should talk to you first. But the medical window was so narrow, and I was desperate. If you want to walk away, if this is too much, I understand. We'll find another way. Rafik looked at the ultrasound image Samir had pressed into his hand. He thought about the 3 weeks of agony, the sleepless nights, the way he'd shut out the woman he loved because he believed the worst without asking for the truth. He thought about the kind of man he wanted to be, the kind of man who built homes for families, who created spaces where love could grow. My wife made a promise, Rafik said slowly, to give this child a home. And I made a promise to her 3 years ago, to build a life together where every dream had space to flourish. I don't break my promises, Tariq Sahib. Samira's breath caught. Tariq's eyes filled with tears. But we do this honestly, Rafik continued, his voice stronger now. No more secrets. We tell our families the truth. We tell the child the truth when they're old enough. And Samira, he turned to his wife, taking both her hands in his, we make every major decision together from now on. No more protecting me from difficult conversations. We're partners. That means sharing everything, even the impossible situations. I promise, Samira whispered, tears streaming freely now. I promise, Rafik. Never again. Tariq's mother rose from her corner, approaching Rafik with quiet dignity. She placed her weathered hand on his head in blessing. You are a good man. You will be a good father. May Allah grant you both every happiness, and may this child bring you joy beyond measure. 2 weeks later, Rafik sat in the same hospital, different wing. Samira gripped his hand as contractions rolled through her, and he marveled at her strength, the strength that had led her to say yes to an impossible request, the strength to carry a child that wasn't hers by blood, the strength to endure his cold distance without breaking. I love you, he whispered against her temple. I'm sorry I ever doubted you. You're here now, she gasped between breaths. That's what matters. In the early hours of the morning, A baby girl entered the world with a piercing cry that echoed down the hospital corridors. The nurse placed the tiny, perfect infant in Samira's arms, and Rafiq felt his heart expand in ways he hadn't known possible. Tariq Mahmoud passed away peacefully that same afternoon, having been wheeled to the nursery window to see the baby one last time. His mother held his hand as he whispered, "Noor. Her name is Noor. Light in the darkness. Love's second beginning." The apartment felt different now, filled with the sounds of new life, soft coos, the gentle whir of a baby monitor, Samira's lullabies in the early morning hours. Rafiq stood in the nursery doorway, watching his wife rock baby Noor, and felt overwhelming gratitude for the second chance they'd been given. "She has Farida's teacher's eyes," Samira said softly, not looking up. "Tariq's mother brought me photos yesterday. That same curious, gentle gaze." Rafiq moved closer, running his finger along Noor's tiny hand. Her fingers wrapped around his instinctively, and something in his soul settled into place. "She's ours now. Completely ours." The paperwork had been finalized. Tariq's estate would provide for Noor's education, a trust fund waiting for her 18th birthday. But the day-to-day love, the midnight feedings, the first steps and first words, those belonged to Rafiq and Samira. "I was thinking," Rafiq said, "about what you said in the hospital. About how we need to tell her the truth when she's old enough." "We will," Samira promised. "She'll know about Tariq and Farida, about the gift they gave us, about how love can take so many different forms." "I want to add something to that story," Rafiq said, sitting beside them. "I want her to know about how her parents almost lost each other over miscommunication and fear. How we learned that trust isn't just about believing the best in someone, but about asking questions when things don't make sense. About giving each other the chance to explain." Samira looked at him, her eyes shining. "You're right. We failed each other for those 3 weeks, didn't we?" "We did," Rafiq acknowledged. "I should have confronted you immediately instead of letting my imagination destroy me. And you should have trusted me enough to include me in the decision from the start." "But we found our way back," Samira said, leaning into him. "That's what matters." 3 months later, on a cool December evening, Rafiq and Samir stood on the same rooftop where he'd proposed years ago. The fairy lights he'd strung then had long since been replaced, but new ones twinkled above them as their families gathered around. Noor slept peacefully in her grandmother's arms, Rafiq's mother, who'd embraced the baby as fully as if she'd been born to their bloodline. Tariq's mother was there too, her face peaceful as she watched the young family she'd helped create. The imam who'd married them 3 years ago stood before them again, and Rafiq and Samir held hands as they renewed their vows. "I promise to trust you," Rafiq said, his voice carrying across the rooftop, "even when I don't understand. To ask questions instead of assuming the worst. To remember that the woman I married is good and kind, and that her decisions come from a place of compassion." "I promise to include you," Samira responded, tears sliding down her cheeks, "in every choice, every challenge, every moment of doubt. To remember that marriage is partnership, and that protecting you from difficult truths isn't love, it's distance. I promise to always choose honesty over comfort." They exchanged new rings, simple bands engraved with Noor's name and birthdate, a reminder of what they'd almost lost and what they'd gained. Later, as guests mingled and celebrated, Rafiq found himself alone with Noor for a moment. She gazed up at him with those curious eyes, and he whispered to her the promise he'd made silently 100 times. "Your existence brought us back to each other, little one. You reminded us what love really means, not possession, not assumption, but faith. Faith that the person you've chosen will choose you back, even when the path is unclear. You're our light in the darkness, just like your name says. And we will spend every day making sure you know you are cherished." Samira appeared beside him, wrapping her arm around his waist, and together they looked down at the miracle that had almost cost them everything but instead had given them more than they'd ever imagined. "Thank you," Samira whispered, "for giving us another chance." "Thank you," Rafiq answered, "for being brave enough to say yes when someone needed you, even when it was impossibly hard." They stood together as the city lights flickered on below them, a family forged not by blood but by choice, by forgiveness, by the recognition that true love endures through doubt and fear and emerges stronger on the other side. Noor made a small sound, drawing their attention back to her, and Rafik realized that this moment of perfect presence, of gratitude for what they'd nearly lost, was what he'd spend the rest of his life protecting. Not from difficulty, because life would always bring challenges, but protecting this foundation they'd rebuilt, this understanding that marriage required vulnerability and courage in equal measure. That children deserved parents who chose each other daily, not just on wedding days. That families were built on honesty, even when the truth seemed impossible to speak. As the evening stars emerged above the city, Rafik pressed a kiss to Samira's temple, then to Noor's forehead, and silently thanked a dying man named Tariq for teaching him the most important lesson of all. Love isn't about perfection, it's about perseverance. It's about believing in each other, even through the darkest doubts, and choosing to build something beautiful from the rubble of misunderstanding. Lessons. Trust must be built through communication, not assumption. When doubt enters a relationship, the courage to ask difficult questions with an open heart will always serve you better than silent suffering. Every misunderstanding is an opportunity to deepen connection, if both people choose honesty over self-protection. True love embraces sacrifice while respecting partnership. Compassion that excludes your partner isn't noble, it's isolating. The greatest acts of kindness are those we choose together, where both hearts agree to carry the weight. Include your beloved in your burdens, and watch how shared purpose strengthens rather than divides. Family is defined by commitment, not biology alone. The love that matters most isn't the love we inherit, but the love we choose to give freely. When we open our hearts to those who need us, we discover that the greatest blessings often come disguised as impossible requests, and that the children we raise with intention become our truest legacy. Forgiveness is the bridge between heartbreak and healing. When mistakes threaten to destroy what you've built, remember that every love worth keeping requires the humility to admit fault and the grace to release resentment. The strongest marriages aren't those without conflict, but those where both people choose reconciliation over righteousness, understanding over ego, and tomorrow over yesterday.